本期视频是印度网红学者扎夫达6月17日最新油管直播的节选。扎夫达油管粉丝近100万，在印度网民中拥有很高的人气。他谈到，如果印度和东大交战，美国一定会坐收渔翁之利，并且为了防止印度成为下一个东大，美国处心积虑地遏制印度，限制印度的发展。我们看看他是怎么说的吧。
In the future, if a war happens between India and China, then is it possible that rather than helping India, the Americans will try to engineer a breakup of India so that they shall eliminate a big upcoming threat? Also, is it the best scenario in the American interest in which China and India go to war, resulting in a unipolar world order? Will China and India show maturity in this case against the West? You ask a very good question, my friend. If there's a war between India and China, it will be a win-win situation for the Americans because both are nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed states. Both will possibly incur significant damage if the war goes on beyond a certain amount of time, if there's no quick ceasefire. And that could help the Americans immensely because China is currently the biggest threat from the economic perspective, the manufacturing and all so on and so forth perspective for the US. The Russians are the biggest military threat for the US. And India is the one long-term emerging threat for the US from their perspective. We don't threaten anybody, but they see anybody who's emerging as a threat to them because they don't want any emerging power in the world, the Americans. So if India and China go to war, they will they will try and impose conditions on India. They're okay, we're willing to help you, but here are the conditions. I have a video on this channel about what demands the Americans will make in exchange for help against China. And even if they eventually do help India, it will be minimal help, which will essentially ensure that India emerges from this war situation significantly diminished. So they are not anyone's friends. They are nobody's friends. They're not even Australia or the UK's friends. They're no one's friends. They're the sole superpower, and they want to maintain that status. When you are the sole superpower, you're jealous. You're jealous of anyone who is potentially going to emerge. So, yeah. So if the war happens, it will be great for them. The ideal situation for the US is that India and China blow each other's brains out and totally destroy each other, and then they can peacefully deal with Russia in their own sweet time. That's the ideal situation for them. So what should India and China do? I mean, China needs to behave a little bit. We don't threaten China. They have been antagonizing India. They have been trying to bite around at India's territory, and now that India is being ramping up infrastructure development in the northern parts, in the Tibet bordering regions, they go ahead with this Galwan clash and whatnot. It is entirely their fault that the situation is bad. The relations between the two nations are bad. It's China's fault. They're also pressuring other nations. They're trying to interfere in Nepal. They're trying to bully Bhutan. So the Chinese have themselves to blame for their bad relationship with India. They have steadfastly refused to demarcate the India-Tibet border for decades. It's not our fault, it's their fault. So I think the Chinese need to demonstrate some amount of maturity. They have been behaving in a very childish manner, a very immature manner. They should understand that India is not a threat to them. India doesn't threaten China. India doesn't claim Chinese territory. India has never started a war with China. India, the past 2,000 years, has given so much to China without asking anything in return. I hope that India and China don't go to war. I hope the Chinese don't start a war. If a war happens between India and China, it will be started by the Chinese, not by India. It is in both nations' interests not to go to war. And I hope that China will show maturity in this matter. But the Chinese seem to see the world from a zero-sum perspective, that for them to win, everybody else has to lose. So, so if the two nations go to war, it's going to only end up benefiting the West. It's going to end up benefiting the US. Please show some maturity. India is not your enemy. India is your elder brother, civilizationally. All right? And we need to get along. Because in the long run, we have to coexist. India is not going anywhere. India is not going anywhere. No matter how much you desire that. Earlier, there were plans for a north-south trade corridor from which India could get access to Europe for trade, but then the US and Iran sanctions slowed it, and now even America, even Armenia is not stable. Then last year, the US came up with the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, and soon after that, a conflict started with Hezbollah and Hamas and Israel. So, do you think that all the major powers don't want India to get a trade route with Europe? You see, India is a growing economy. And if India keeps on growing at 6, 7, 8%, whatever percentage per year for the next 20 years, first of all, in the next 3 to 4 to 5 years maximum, India is going to be the third largest economy in the world. It's going to be the US, China, India. And if India keeps growing the way it is growing, then India could eventually, by 2050, perhaps even surpass China. That is a big problem for the West. This nation, this civilization that they had almost destroyed, stamped out, sucked everything out of, it is still alive, and now it's again emerging out of the debris, out of the destruction caused by the British. And there is this resurgence of some kind of national pride in India. Most Indians are still deeply, mentally colonized and deracinated, but there is some pride that's re-emerging in India. And that sets off alarm bells in the West. So yes, it is not in their interest if India does well. They want to utilize India in certain ways. India has limited utility, like I've said, for the West. They would like India to be an exporter of services, not goods. Or if India exports goods, then it should be only the goods that they desire. They don't want India to become a major manufacturing power. They would like to outsource the manufacturing now, not anymore to China. They want to seek other options, but maybe Vietnam and other countries, but hopefully not India. They don't want to turn India into the next China. And obviously they would like to use India as a counterbalance to China, but they would like to counterbalance India also with Pakistan and in a new nation called Cookie Land. So they are not India's friends. They don't want to see India develop infrastructure, trade routes, supply chains, etc. with Europe. India has been very nicely isolated the past 70, 80 years. I mean, look at the map. Why was Pakistan created? To cut India off from Eurasia. India historically has had thousands of years of connections with Central Asia and Europe and Eurasia. That has been entirely cut off thanks to the great, wonderful founding fathers of India who accepted this in 1947. So India is completely cut off from Eurasia. So it's very clear that the US, forget about the major powers. There are no major powers in the West. There's only one major power in the West, which is the US. And all other Western powers are vassals of the US, the puppets. So the Americans do not want to see India grow. They do not want to see, forget about rising, they don't want India to grow at all. India should be cut down to size, and this Cookie Land thing, this new nation thing, is all a means of doing that. So it's going to be challenging for India. How does India deal with this? So you either just give in to the West and just allow them to use you in whatever way you want, which means that you will eventually become the next Japan and you'll be destroyed. Or you resist, but then you pay some price for that. So these are the big dilemmas that Mr. Modi has to grapple with. So yes, they invite Mr. Modi to the G7 summit. They give him a center position and all that. But there's a price. There's a price. And so they, on the one hand, they're shaking hands with you. On the other hand, they're twisting a knife in your back at the same time. That's what's happening. And you got to smile and shake hands while a knife is being twisted in your back. That is international relations. That is geopolitics. That is diplomacy. Geopolitics is the rule of the jungle.